Hi guys, I'm here to talk to you today about three things, and let me grab my note because now I'm blanking out, but I knew what I was going to say. Um, so three things. I want to just give you a quick list of introduction paragraph types, and these would apply to any academic essay and really any essay that you're ever writing, but I'll try to direct my conversation about them today, my presentation about them today, to memoirs in general. I want to go over thesis statement with you. You guys remember we talked about thesis statement in class on the 27th, and at that time I reminded you that, or introduced you for the first time, that the thesis statement is something that I call the statement of purpose, so that we have a very clear link between thesis statement and what purpose is in writing, especially academic writing. And then I want to talk to you very quickly about maybe ideas for how to conclude your memoir. All right, so first, just a quick list of introductions. You might be wondering, so how can I start this memoir? And a lot of you I want to point out, and I didn't get to pass these back yesterday, but a lot of you had really strong introductions to your piece of writing, the person that you love. You remember the first day of class when I asked you to write that. So I know a lot of you already know what to do with introductions, but I'll just give you a list of ideas. And I'm getting these from actually all the memoir reading that we have been doing so far in the class. And I'll try to refer to examples as I list them. So the first one that I encountered was just a paragraph that kind of, I guess we could say it gave background information. Excuse me. But I think it was more, when I'm looking at the way the paragraph operated, it was more the writer giving general information about the topic or the focus of his memoir. And he knew at that point that he was going to get personal with the topic. So I'm thinking of, and I can't remember the guy's name, but it was the memoir about, excuse me again, living near fire. And so he talks about fire very generally in the introduction. Another one is to use dialogue. You might recall the memoir about the woman whose mother has passed away, and it starts with a phone conversation back and forth between people in the Social Security office. So dialogue is a really cool way to just get people right into the action of your narrative or of your story. And then something else related to dialogue is just throwing the reader right into the mix of the story. So using dialogue is one way. Just starting to tell the story is another way. Or using some very attractive description that really kind of draw people in. I was looking at the Harry Crews memoir, the way it started, and he just kind of starts talking about what life was like in his home in the beginning of that excerpt, what it was like to be around his dad, who seemed to be losing it at that time. So he just throws us right into the middle of the dialogue right into the middle of the story, into the narrative, without dialogue this time, but just kind of telling what was occurring. You can use a direct statement as an introduction. And I think, who was I looking at? It must have been, it was the Edward Abbey, the Desert Solitaire excerpt, where he just talks about what it's like to be in the desert, just right up front, just very straightforward sentence. And if you notice that one, it has a sentence just there by itself, and then he continues on to another paragraph. So very direct sentence. Sometimes these sentences can be surprising, shocking, but they don't have to be, and his wasn't necessarily, but it was a very direct statement. There was a lot of confidence behind it. Two more. Another introduction idea is to define something. An idea or a concept that's at the core of your memoir. So if any of you read the Joan Didion excerpt about grief, she actually starts to define what grief is like for people who haven't encountered it. So sort of the expectation of grief. And she defines that in the beginning of her memoir. So you could do some kind of definition, whether it's a more formal accepted definition that everyone understands, or a more personal definition. And last but not least, I looked at the Richard Wright excerpt, and he starts with sort of a once upon a time beginning. But of course, he's not telling a fairy tale, he's writing his real life on the page, so he changes it to once upon a time to, 40 years ago, blah, 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 whatever he does to define time for him. But there's this sense that he's hearkening back to a long time ago. So you could do something like that as well. All right, so those were just introduction types. And just so you know, if you want more information about introductions, page 53 in our textbook, I asked you to maybe look at the table of contents, Roman numeral 12 and 13 yesterday. And this is listed on that page, but there's more general information about academic essay introductions. But again, you can kind of tailor them to your memoir, right? You don't want to have an introduction that feels like you're writing a school essay. You want it to be something that flows very nicely with the story you're going to tell. All right, thesis statements or statements of purpose. You have to have one. We talked in class yesterday about the possibility that some memoirs won't have them because they're just telling the story and the writer doesn't feel it's necessary to come out and say, so here's the reason I'm writing, guys. The way that Junot Diaz did not. His thesis was sort of implicit in his essay. So let's talk about thesis statements. And I did put a picture of my pre-writing on the whiteboard from yesterday so you can have a look at it if you'd like. But I wrote down 3 thesis statements in my journal. You guys can see I have like 3 draft statements here, my 3 thesis statements, my 3 possible statements of purpose. And I'm always easy on myself with the first one because I don't feel like doing it. I'm resisting wanting to write a thesis statement because it's so mechanical and so school related. But I'm going to force myself, and I did it in a very simplistic way, and I pretty much just pulled words right out of what I wrote on the whiteboard. You could do the same with what you wrote in your journal. I asked you to answer why you're writing this story, so you could go to that little part and see if there are words you could use for your thesis. So here's my really forced one, my statement of purpose. I wrote, I want to write my memory of her because she's in my mind when I'm in my kitchen. So I was answering directly the why am I writing this story question. And I know at the end of that sentence that there's some good stuff in it, but I don't really like it. It feels forced and it's too direct. I want to try to make my thesis flow more smoothly and with the story that I'm telling, almost to the point where you can't identify it as a thesis at all. So let me try my second one now. I wrote, we learn to express love from the food set before us on the family table. And I like this sentence a lot better, but it has too much of a lesson feel to it, like I'm going to lecture you on what I know about how to feed a family and how to express love in a family. So I think it's better than my first one, but I don't like it for my memoir where I'm going to be using first person I quite a bit to tell my story. So here's my third attempt, and I have to say I'm most pleased with it. So when I'm drafting my essay, I'm going to put this in and see how it fits with the rest of my story. Here's my third attempt at my statement of purpose. I'm like mixing up all my words. When I'm in the kitchen cooking or baking, I think of the woman I loved. And I used past tense loved because it will give a signal to the readers that I'm going to tell a story from earlier in my life when I learned that I loved her. And you can kind of see that I'm going to be having a story that's set in the kitchen. So I'm very excited, and that it's about cooking or baking of some kind. So instead of coming out and saying, I'm writing an essay about my grandmother teaching me how to cook, I have that one. So I'm going to read my third one again. I'm most pleased with this one. Of the 3 attempts, it makes me the happiest. When I'm in the kitchen cooking or baking, I think of the woman I loved, period. So then I'll continue on with my story. All right, so last but not least, very quickly, conclusions. You know, the only thing I'm going to say about conclusions to you right now is that wherever you start in the introduction, and I gave you a list of different introduction types, you need to come back. You need to circle back to whatever you have in that introduction. So the thing to avoid is repeating your thesis. Don't do that in your conclusion. It will not be a good thing. It ends too much like the beginning because it's word for word. But circle back. Echo back to the idea that you started in the beginning. And then the idea is to circle back, but then to move forward from that. It's not enough just to repeat it. So you have to sometimes express what it means to you now that you've explored this whole story. You can apply it to something else that's occurring to you right now because you see there's a connection between this moment in your life and the previous moment in your life. But you hear what I'm saying? Circle back to the way that you started the essay and do something with it. Do something more than just repeat it. Okay, that's all I have for this week. I hope you guys have a fabulous week, and I will see you at the chat this week that is scheduled and is listed in the news portion of our D2L section. See you later.